The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So we have some pretty big geopolitics to talk about today. Over the weekend, some Saudi oil facilities were attacked, and the Trump administration is increasingly looking at Iran as the culprit. And before we get into sort of like the specific analysis, anytime in the Trump era that we're doing an analysis of geopolitics, there's sort of like the normal analysis one would do based on the last 200 years of American history. And then you have to modify that analysis to account for the fact that Donald Trump is president of the United States. An analogy that came to me over the weekend is sort of like if you have an airline pilot that flies a particular airplane, right, an Airbus 330, and you say, what is the takeoff speed of the Airbus 330? And you have your like in a vacuum answer, which might be 150 knots. But then much like you have to account for Donald Trump being president in geopolitics, you then have to account for whether the runway is dry or wet and what is the elevation of the airport and other things. And you might end up with an answer where, well, in this particular case, the takeoff speed for an Airbus 330 is 160 knots when accounting for these other factors. And similarly, with Donald Trump thrown into geopolitics, we have to account for Donald Trump in making our evaluation. So a few different things to go over. It's the event that took place, the hypocrisy from Donald Trump, and also the growing subservience by Donald Trump to the Saudis, which is something that we should all be extremely worried about, in particular because of the connections we already know Trump and Jared Kushner and others around him have to the Saudis. So first of all, why the focus on Iran? So far, what we know is that a number of Saudi oil facilities were attacked over the weekend. We have satellite images that show 17 points of impact coming from the north or the northwest, which could be Iran, it could be Iraq. Now, in the immediate, the Iranian-backed Houthi militias, I'm never sure how to pronounce that, from Yemen claimed responsibility. And there are reasons to be skeptical about this. The direction of the attacks is at least a potential reason to be skeptical. The use of cruise missiles and drones seem to exceed the known capabilities of the Houthis. And Donald Trump, as usual, is reacting to everything in the worst possible way. Erratic, indirect, and sort of showing his cards that he is indeed subservient to the Saudis. Hypocritical subservience is maybe how I would sum it up. So first of all, Donald Trump tweeting, Saudi Arabia oil supply was attacked. There is reason to believe that we know the culprit, are locked and loaded depending on verification, but are waiting to hear from the kingdom as to who they believe was the cause of this attack and under what terms we would proceed. Look at all of the extremely disturbing elements just to this one tweet, hinting at Iran but not saying it. We have reason to believe we know who did it. Why not just come out and say it? Locked and loaded. It's a threat of violence, but again, it's predicated on Donald Trump having reason to believe that he knows who it is, but saying that once the Saudis tell him who they believe did it, he's locked and loaded and ready to go under whatever terms the Saudis say are the ones that Donald Trump should operate under. This is a level of subservience to the Saudis. And then we get to the hypocrisy, because Donald Trump in 2014 tweeted, quote, Saudi Arabia should fight their own wars, which they won't, or pay us an absolute fortune to protect them and their great wealth, $1 trillion. Of course, Donald Trump was not president at the time. Barack Obama was president at the time. So was that just BS and political bluster? Probably. The other possibility is Donald Trump actually has made some kind of deal with the Saudis for the U.S. to be their protector. And in a way, that deal has sort of been made in plain sight for decades through American foreign policy. Donald Trump may well see, and it actually wouldn't be that crazy, he may see the endless and infinitely growing arms deals with Saudi Arabia as that sort of payment to the United States for the protection of the Saudis. You may recall that when Barack Obama sort of semi-bowed to the Saudis when they were greeting each other, the right went crazy, even though George W. Bush was kissing the Saudis on the cheek and they seemed fine with it at the time. Now Donald Trump is saying, when the Saudis tell me who they think did it, and when the Saudis tell me what the appropriate response would be, we're going to go out and do it. Really strong leader, right? Projecting strength and independence and focusing on what's best for the... Oh, wait, no, he's really not. Some of the bigger geopolitical questions here. Does Donald Trump want a war with someone to help the arms industry? Is that sort of what is at the core of what's going on here? Does Donald Trump want a war with someone so that he can finally be the tough guy that he, of course, is not, but desperately wants to be? Does Donald Trump want a war with someone because he believes it will help his reelection? After all, that would not be incorrect, in a sense. I'm trying to think of when the United States voted out an incumbent president in the middle of a war or significant military engagement. And I'm having trouble thinking of that. Maybe there are examples. Or, because this is all obviously not just one thing, it could be a combination. Does Donald Trump want a war because it will be a distraction from one of his many current or upcoming scandals? A combination is usually sort of the right answer with this president. I got a lot of emails from the audience over the last year saying, David, at some point Trump is going to war. The question is, who will it be against and under what pretenses? But the guy is going to find a war one way or another. Either John Bolton is going to help him, or if John Bolton is the impediment, Bolton will go, which he since has, and Trump will find a war on his own. Maybe not more cynical than reality actually suggests here. And of course, immediately the economic impact is significant, relatively minor in the context of the broader insanity, but oil prices spiking about 1/6 from $60 to $71. We don't even get that much of our oil from Saudi Arabia. The notion that we are dependent on the Saudis for the oil itself is wrong. I mean, they have a big market share, but from my recollection, we get around 11% of our total oil consumption from foreign countries. And of that 11%, I think it's 9% only is from Saudi Arabia. So the actual numbers don't bear it out, but of course, a massive player in OPEC and in controlling the oil market. So an economic impact right away. I don't know where this will go. We'll keep following it. I want to hear from you about it. But this is, of course, going to be a very, very crazy year leading up to the November 2020 election. There is a sort of stunning hypocrisy around the recent vaping-related panic that the president has shown. Now, last week we had this sort of cartoonish moment where Donald Trump explained that the first lady, meaning his wife Melania Trump, is finds the vaping issue very important because she has a son. Of course, it's also Donald Trump's son, and it was funny and it was a good laugh. But there's actually a much bigger stunning hypocrisy surrounding this entire vaping thing, and Donald Trump wanting to ban and or heavily regulate vaping over 6 deaths that may or may not be related to vaping specifically. So let's back it up and kind of set the story up. What is vaping? Vaping is inhaling and exhaling the aerosol. It's often called vapor, which suggests that it's water vapor, but it's not. It's the aerosols produced by e-cigarettes or similar devices. And the term vaping is used because the e-cigs don't produce tobacco smoke. So the term vaping is a very innocuous way to say, well, these are aerosols that are being created rather than tobacco smoke. And those aerosols contain varying amounts of different chemicals, many of which are known to be toxic, many of which have been linked to cancer or heart disease or respiratory disease. So it's obviously not a healthy thing to be doing, to be vaping. There are debates over, is it less bad than just straight up smoking cigarettes? Is it less bad than smoking pot in the sort of traditional way? Those are open questions. But the idea that this is not harmful is completely laughable. That's kind of the starting point. Donald Trump now is talking about banning vaping altogether. So first of all, the question is, did 6 people really die from vaping? Unclear. The CDC has identified close to 400 confirmed cases of what they call vaping-related lung illnesses and 6 deaths. Now, whether the cause is vaping itself, the answer is probably not from what I've researched. It does appear that there are chemicals in some of these vaping products, and it could be the chemicals themselves or interactions between chemicals or interactions between chemicals and THC or the chemicals and nicotine, which could be causing these illnesses. I don't pretend to know. We don't fully know. But let's just for a second today pretend that, you know what? It is the mechanism of vaping itself that caused these 6 deaths. If 6 people dying from something means that the president gets involved and bans it, what about cigarettes? What about alcohol? And maybe even most importantly, what about firearms? Whatever the intended use of these things. So with guns, you can say, well, the intended use of a firearm is self-defense. Cigarettes, you can say the intended use is, nicotine, enjoyment of nicotine, the pleasure of nicotine. I don't know. The goal of alcohol is relaxation in social settings. Doesn't matter. More than 6 people, many, many more than 6 people die as a result of guns, cigarettes, and alcohol every year. Way more than even ostensibly attributed to vaping at this point in time. You can go further. More people die in migrant detention than from vaping. And there is no interest in banning that from Donald Trump whatsoever, although maybe the political circumstances are very different there. They are. The guns that are mostly killing people other than the owners are doing a type of damage to the non-users that vaping is not. I mean, in the end, vaping, if anything, is killing the vapors and the vapors alone, whereas firearms are killing innocent people, other people that don't even have the firearms. So there is this incredible hypocrisy of being against nanny states and being for businesses doing what they, all that stuff that we hear from so-called pro-business, small government conservatives. And then 6 people maybe die as a result of associated chemicals with vaping. And Donald Trump right away is talking about banning vaping. And there are a number of angles on this that I've read about, many of which are compelling. One is that people are smoking traditional cigarettes less and less in the United States. And that this is all part, knowingly or unknowingly, of a way to, again, try to reinvigorate the tobacco industry, which to some degree is suffering because people are abandoning smoking over time, which is a really great thing. So there's the sort of corporate angle. The other one is that this is an easy moral position to take for Donald Trump, and therefore he is jumping in headfirst, so to speak. Now, when we talk about, aside from Trump's hypocrisy, when we talk about regulating and banning things, there is actually a need to have an adult conversation. Just doing the countries, governments shouldn't ban stuff that's nanny state. And anyway, when you ban something, all you do is create a black market for it. Versus we just need to regulate and ban everything, which nobody really takes that position. We should be scrutinizing and considering regulation or banning on each issue individually. And we need to be looking at how would regulating or prohibiting this versus that actually influence the behavior we are trying to stop? What sort of other effects, what side effects will there be from the regulation or the ban? There's a case to be made that aggressive regulation of guns, not bans per se, but that aggressive regulation, including background checks, including more extensive licensing, a national registry, required insurance, making ammunition significantly more expensive through taxation, that would drastically reduce gun deaths, which is the goal, at least of public health advocates, if not the NRA. Banning vapes will actually do very little without a more holistic approach, including looking at alternatives. And of course, how do you justify banning vapes and cigarettes are still legal? Well, you need only look at the power of their respective lobbies. Guns have alternatives that are far less lethal. Knives, right? We've talked about this before. And yet there is no willingness to do anything about it. And here we have Donald Trump all of a sudden saying we've got to ban vapes on the basis of 6 possible deaths. The hypocrisy is stunning, but also the hangers-on that are coming out of the woodwork with their faux libertarian ideology are quite frankly making me sick. Let me know what you think about the entire vaping hypocrisy. I'm on Twitter at dpacman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new members of the day are Karen Edgar and Laura Siliceo Roman, who I really appreciate having signed up. www.joinpakman.com is where you do it. It takes under a minute. really supports the work we do directly, and someone who's been a member for almost 5 years, today's longtime sustaining member of the day, Andreas Nezovic. I remember when young Andreas, actually don't know what age he is, young Andreas was our new member of the day, and now Andreas has graduated and is the longtime sustaining member of the day. Join these great people at joinpacman.com. So we had another weekend, as often happens every week. And what that means in practice is that our president has again unleashed another furious tweet storm riddled with spelling and grammar errors and random capitalization of words. And the topic this time was Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh. There are new sexual assault allegations against Brett Kavanaugh, despite having been told during the confirmation hearings of Brett Kavanaugh that the FBI looked into all of the allegations into Brett Kavanaugh. Not surprising, not shocking. More allegations have surfaced, including ones that the FBI did not look into during his confirmation hearings. And the particulars of the latest allegation are that Kavanaugh exposed his most intimate of areas, use your imagination, to a female Yale classmate, and that others subsequently pushed the hands of the classmate into Kavanaugh's most intimate of areas. Nothing shocking about this, nothing surprising. This seems to just be who Brett Kavanaugh is. It became very, very clear. Of course, no particular reason now to be concocting this. Some of the normal Twitter hangers-on suggesting that it's because we are now 14 months from an election, that now some bogus allegation against an already confirmed Supreme Court justice who is almost impossible to remove makes sense for political reasons, which, I mean, if you're going to concoct something that actually has a shot at doing some damage to the person involved. Donald Trump flying off the handle as a result, immediately suggesting that Kavanaugh sue for, listen to this one, he should sue for liable. Now, why am I pronouncing it liable? Because that's how Trump spelled it, L-I-A-B-L-E, I guess meaning, of course, L-I-B-E-L, libel, a published false statement damaging to a person's reputation. Trump concocting a bizarre conspiratorial series of tweets. First tweeting, Brett Kavanaugh should start suing people for liable, or the Justice Department should come to his rescue, which, by the way, the Justice Department coming to his rescue is an extremely authoritarian suggestion. Trump going on, the lies being told about him are unbelievable, false accusations without recrimination. When does it stop? They are trying to influence his opinions. Can't let that happen. Eventually, Trump deleted it and reposted it with the corrected spelling of libel, and then kept going with more. Quote, can't let Brett Kavanaugh give radical left Democrat liberal plus opinions. Each one of those words capitalized. Why? We don't know. Based on threats of capital I impeaching him over made-up stories. Sound familiar? False allegations and lies. This is the game they play. Fake and corrupt news is working overtime. Hashtag protect Kavanaugh. These are the rantings of the equivalent of someone, again, who's yelling at you while they urinate on the subway tracks on Canal Street while you wait for the 6 train. I'll do one more tweet, not the entire list of tweets, because it's quite frankly just too much to keep up with. Trump tweeting, I am fighting the fake, corrupt news, the deep state, the Democrats, and the few remaining Republicans in name only, rhinos who are on mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. With the help of some truly great Republicans and others, we are winning big. 150th federal judge this week. Now, the last thing Trump mentions there, 150 federal judges, Trump's right about this. I've talked about this before. Supreme Court selections get a lot of attention. Federal judgeships, much less so. And Donald Trump is actually winning really big with those federal judgeship selections. It gets very little attention. It has a huge impact, and it has a huge impact for a very long time. Most cases never make it to the Supreme Court. A lot of the important precedent in this country is ultimately decided by federal judges, many of which have now been appointed by Donald Trump. I think we found that about 25% of current federal and superior court, I forget the categorizations, have been selected by Trump in just 2 years. And this has a massive, massive impact. Now, as far as the subject matter, the idea of libel suits against accusers of Kavanaugh, consider for a second that there have been, 15, 16, 19, 20 women who have accused Donald Trump of anything ranging from verbal sexual harassment all the way up to and including rape. Donald Trump has not filed a single libel lawsuit. I wonder why that is. If anybody who is falsely accused of sexual assault deserves to have a libel lawsuit filed against them, and it would be something in which one could prevail, why hasn't Donald Trump filed a single libel lawsuit against all of his accusers? And of course, there will not be any libel lawsuits by Brett Kavanaugh against these accusers either, and I think we all know why that is. Going back once again to the idea from Donald Trump's tweets that he's fighting the fake corrupt media, this is the last thing I want to touch on. Trump's not fighting the fake corrupt media. The fake corrupt news media, as Trump calls it, or I just call it corporate media, they are in on the game. And what I mean by that is that you have some in corporate media that just will defend Trump endlessly or almost endlessly, like Fox News. Others take a more critical editorial perspective, MSNBC. Others play the enlightened watchdogs with bipartisan panels like CNN, but they're all participating in the game. They create and suck out all the ratings that they can from the distraction stories and narratives that Donald Trump creates. And then when the time is up, they just move on to the next thing, never really closing the book on the impact of each of these narratives. And Trump is simply wrong because they are actually working with him. The fight is the public spin on it. But the reality is that corporate media have been in with Trump, including the billions in free publicity that they gave him from the time he started his campaign. That is backwards. Trump has that backwards. And again, Trump is completely erratic and unhinged every single weekend on Twitter. Hey, I've got something really interesting for you here. Jeanine Pirro, who is a former judge. I mean, she actually was a judge at one point, and it's an incredible indictment on the American justice system. She's now a Fox News host. She went on C-SPAN, and it did not go well at all. She has been one of the persistent, outrageous, the opposite of a never Trumper, an always Trumper, an unhinged defender of Donald Trump on Fox News, just persistently all the time. Any crazy notion from Donald Trump, she will defend. She went on a C-SPAN program called Washington Journal. People call into that show, and she was straight up confronted by a caller. This is a caller from Texas who reamed her out so severely in such a way that she was visibly unsure what to do. She either could not respond or chose not to respond. She looks visibly stunned by this dressing down that a caller gave her. Take a look at this.
Our president and our beautiful first lady, they went down to El Paso, Texas, and they posed with a baby that the president's rhetoric, Fox News rhetoric, your rhetoric, had helped to orphan. And I think this thing about Trump is making America great again. Trump has made America hate again. And it's this hatred of races. I hear it all the time when I talk to Republicans and they say, oh, I went down to Texas and there are all these Mexicans down there and they're all speaking Spanish. Well, I got news for you. Those weren't Mexicans. Those were the Americans. That guy that went down to El Paso to shoot a bunch of Mexicans, he shot a bunch of Americans. And I'm really tired of this anti-immigrant, anti-people with brown skin rhetoric that's coming out of Fox News, coming out of people like you, and coming out of our president. It's demeaning. It's beneath the office. It's beneath you. You used to be a judge. You know better. It's time that stopped.
Thank you, Carol. We'll get a response.
Look, you know what? I refuse to accept your recitation of the facts. You are dead wrong. The problem in this country, not the color of anyone, and don't you dare accuse me of any kind of issue related to color. I have 30 years of prosecuting without fear or favor and making sure that hate crimes were vigorously prosecuted. I fought for a hate crimes law.
It's genuinely shocking that she didn't interrupt, and the look on her face of growing confusion and this almost inability to jump in is really priceless. If you're just listening, you should definitely watch the clip. Beautiful to see. Now, not everything the guy said was 100% true, but he did pretty accurately get into this idea of stochastic terrorism that I've been talking about for a long time, and the impact of what Jeanine Pirro and other Fox Trump flunkies do and the effect that it has on the real world. She has made commentaries on Fox News that have suggested that Democrats entice undocumented Hispanic immigrants to come to the United States so that they can vote for Democrats. This is something that had a prominent role in the El Paso shooters manifesto. The idea of, I need to go take out Hispanic people because Democrats are in bed with them and bringing them to the U.S. to try to turn elections in their favor. I don't know what's crazier, that she was a judge, which is nuts. I mean, it is insane that this is someone who was actually a judge, or that she continues to be a Fox News host despite participating in this sort of blind, erratic, reflexive loyalty to the president, and even kind of becoming an aggravating factor in many of the problems that the president is creating himself. There are actually lots of really crazy right-wing judges. We think of judges as these sort of beyond partisanship arbiters of the law in some way. And you have to look only at the fact that Jeanine Pirro was a judge, that crazy Texas Congressman Louis Gohmert was a judge, if I recall correctly. And this gets to the bigger problem of judges. There are so many right-wingers who talk about they want textual conservative justices. What they are actually talking about are complete and total partisan hacks who do the opposite of simply be conservative, if conservative means merely applying the letter of the law to the circumstances. They do that if it helps Republicans and big corporations or whoever they want to help. And if it doesn't, they take a completely different, not conservative, but simply activist right-wing perspective as judges. For context, here's another caller during Jeanine Pirro's appearance who is a complete and total right-wing lunatic saying, I'm not racist, but we white people legally obtained our guns, drawing a contrast, I guess, to non-white people, and then saying that Jeanine Pirro is a genius and that Donald Trump would be really smart to listen to her, and also slam C-SPAN itself during the opening. This is just another caller during Jeanine Pirro's appearance.
Hi, Judge.
Hi,
I know you thought you'd get a fair shot here on Washington Journal C-SPAN, but as you see, you get 6 to 7 Democrat callers to 1 Republican. That they're just as bad as CNN with the fake news about Donald Trump. They attack him just as much as anybody. But, so preach it while you can, sister, because you probably won't be invited back.
Well, let me jump in. That's not true. We're taking calls from Democrats, Republicans, and Independents. We welcome her for the hour. And Judge Jeanine, you are welcome back anytime. We'd love to have you. But caller, go ahead.
Sure. Thank you so much. Judge Jeanine, being a prosecutor, I feel that the Democrats are attacking only white people's guns. And I'm not being racist, but what I'm saying is we legally obtain our guns. We go to buy our firearms. We fill out background checks. And the thing that upsets me the most, and I do hope that Donald Trump listens to you because I know you are a very smart woman, and we need people like you talking to Donald Trump. But I fear that he doesn't see what's going on.
You can find the rest of that call online where they go into the normal black-on-black crime talking points and all of the stuff you would expect. Really scary what's going on. Why Jeanine Pirro is even on C-SPAN is beyond me. That seems to be the real problem, selling her hack book. But at least one caller really backing her off, and she was visibly unsure about how to respond. Let me know if you saw this entire appearance. It was wacky, and make sure you're following The David Pakman Show on Instagram at David Pakman Show. We will take a quick break and be back right after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to welcome to the program today David Sinclair, who's a professor of genetics at Harvard Medical School, as well as the author of the new book, Lifespan, Why We Age and Why We Don't Have to. David, so great to have you on today.
Hey, thanks, David. Thanks for having me on.
So we've interviewed folks like Aubrey de Grey and others, and everybody seems to apply sort of different language and vocabulary sometimes to talking about dealing with aging. There's the idea of curing aging. There's the idea of eliminating aging or making aging obsolete, as an example. Can you talk a little bit about sort of your general philosophy when it comes to the human lifespan and the sort of way you talk about and think about it?
Sure. Well, I'm not an immortalist. I'm a realist. I'm a scientist at Harvard Medical School, grounded in research we've been doing for over 25 years now. My view, though, is that by tackling the major cause of all diseases in our society, all major diseases, which is aging, we will have a dramatic impact on those diseases and people's longevity and how young they can stay into the last 5, 10, 15 years of their lives.
And how much of the focus in your mind needs to be on, or I guess when we think about the approach that you take, is the idea to think about aging as a condition that we are looking to treat differently? Or is it more like, for example, when we talk about cancer treatment, we're really talking about a number of different conditions, each which needs or requires sort of a different approach depending on the particulars being not just the particulars of the condition, but also the particulars of the individual that we're looking to treat?
Well, about 10 years ago, the field that I'm in, longevity research, we declared that we had discovered the major hallmarks of aging. And these are things like mitochondrial dysfunction, energy decline, stem cell depletion, telomere shortening. There's a group of them. And we were quite happy for those years. But I've always been fascinated in trying to find what's causing all of those, because they don't just happen. There has to be, in my view, a unifying reason. And that's what I think that I've come up with. This is my best explanation. And in the book, I describe much of the evidence that we've accumulated over 10 years. So what I think is causing all of those various hallmarks is a loss of information, the analog information in our cells. Now, what that means is that instead of having 5, 10, 20 different medicines to tackle each one of the hallmarks of aging, if I'm right, a single medicine could reverse the aging process.
And what is the sort of physical way in which this operates? What is it specifically that is the process that you would be looking to either undo, stop, or actually reverse?
Yeah, well, only in the last few years we've realized that across all mammals, of course, including ourselves, there's what's called the DNA methylation clock. We also call it the Horvath clock, named after my friend Steve Horvath. And if I took your blood, Dave, I could read how old you are and even predict when you're going to die. And these marks are part of the epigenome. Now, we all know the genome very well, but the epigenome is the layer above that regulates which genes are turned on and off. The epigenome is what allows us to go from a fertilized cell to a newborn of 26 billion cells, each tissue with thousands of different types of cells in there. The epigenome, I think, is what goes awry as we get older. We lose the epigenetic information, and that's the analog information of the cell. Now, anyone who's had a record player or a cassette tape knows that analog information is pretty useless at preserving information. And I think that's also true for our bodies. Now, the question is, can you find a backup copy of that epigenetic information to perform a reset of the cells? And I think we're coming very close to being able to do that. And we've already got some pretty interesting results in mice already.
What's the mechanism through which that could be done? Is it the delivery mechanism I'm talking about? Are we talking about a pill? Are we talking about nanotechnology, et cetera?
Yeah, well, it's early days. In fact, some of this work is not even published yet. Listeners can find this online. We've posted it. It's under peer review. There have been others who have published work that shows that you can also reset the clock. So how do we currently do it? Well, the first way it was done was to genetically modify mice. That's obviously not going to help. And that was also toxic the way it worked out. We've now packaged a set of 3 reprogramming genes that actually we use what are called Yamanaka factors, Yamanaka genes. Yamanaka won the Nobel Prize in 2012 for learning how to make stem cells out of skin cells and other adult cells in the body. But we use them to reset the clock in the body. We don't make stem cells, we push them partially back to where they came from. We deliver them, as you said, in a virus. Right now, it's a viral therapy. It would be used, we think, in the eye initially, which is where a lot of gene therapy is being applied in the clinic right now to correct genetic diseases. So we wouldn't be correcting genetic diseases necessarily. We would be using it to rewind the clock and allow tissues and organs like the eye to recover and become more youthful. And in mice, at least, we've managed to restore eyesight in old mice.
What's the timeline that, understanding that it's still very early, that you think this may be developed on and available on?
Well, I'm an entrepreneur. Many people who know me know that very well. I've started many companies over the years. There's a new company that I'm working with Horvath, the friend I mentioned, a professor at UCLA, and myself and Professor Belmonte, who did the initial discovery that I mentioned about reprogramming. We've come together to make a go at this. We're going to be hopefully treating the first patient in less than 2 years from now. And our goal is to treat glaucoma, damage to the eye due to pressure. And we think that that'll be, if it works, the first of many treatments of turning back the clock in various parts of the body, and hopefully eventually throughout the entire body to have an age reset.
There are certain populations that have been studied for their longevity. So there are the Icarians, there are a number of these different populations that folks have heard of that live longer on average than others. Can you talk a little bit about whether in the work that you do, there is significance to that? My understanding is that much of their longevity is attributed to lifestyle. It seems as though your work is operating on a sort of different level. So do those populations have any research value to you, or are we really dealing with something very, very different?
No, actually, it all ties together. If my theory didn't explain the last 100 years of observations, it wouldn't be a useful theory. So what we see and also predict, but what we currently see is that a stable epigenome, the ability to slow down that biological clock, does happen when societies and individuals have those healthy lifestyles, being hungry every day or every other day, doing a lot of exercise, keeping active, keeping the body in a state of high alert. These are the things that slow down that epigenetic clock that I believe is a driver, if not the main cause of aging itself. Now, there are also genes that we are either born of gene variants that we're born with, if we're lucky, that predispose to living over 100. These are called centenarian families. And the variants in those families are part of this epigenetic regulatory network. Some of them that we work on are called sirtuins, and the I in that sirtuin name stands for information. They're silent information regulators. And those are key players in this epigenetic clock. And we can use various things in our lives, such as what we eat, when we eat, and how much exercise we do, among other things I've put in my book, to slow down that rate of epigenetic clock ticking. There are many others that I talk about in my book and other things that can be done, but we think these are central regulators that are found throughout life and have been with us since the beginning of life.
Do you have a particular diet and or supplement regimen that you adhere to? And the reason I ask that is a lot of the folks that work in the field that you work in seem to have one, which sometimes is not obviously directly related to the research that the person seems to be doing. So it's more of a curiosity.
Mine's more than a curiosity. The work that we do in my lab can be translated into my family's lifestyle and what we take. Of course, I don't recommend to my family that they take it, but they're all scientists and they know what the data suggests, and the risks are far less than the potential reward. And so the first discovery that we made was that the sirtuin regulators of the epigenome need a molecule called NAD. And so that was back actually in 2002, 2003. So I take NAD boosting molecules that I am hoping, and the evidence suggests will put my body in a state of high alert, as though I've been hungrier and exercising than I otherwise have time for. And resveratrol, this was in the news back in 2003. We discovered that resveratrol activates the sirtuin enzyme, which is a protector of the body and also a stabilizer of the epigenetic clock. And so resveratrol from red wine, I've been taking that. So has my father for over a decade now. We both have very good health, and so far so good. I should say, by the way, because I'm a professor at Harvard Medical School, I know that this is not a clinical trial. It's not work that I'm going to publish. But I also know that we've all been born probably a generation or two too early to know for sure if these things work to extend healthy lifespan. And so we do have to be ahead of the curve if we're going to learn what these molecules are actually doing. That said, all of these molecules have been backed up by clinical trials that I'm also running, typically here at Harvard and also around the world. And we know the safety before any molecules are put into my body. And the last one we studied was metformin. We worked with Rafael De Cabo at NIH to show that mice that are fed metformin, which is a diabetes drug, a reasonably safe one, taken by millions of people around the world, that was ostensibly extended their lifespan, certainly kept them healthier. In human studies, it looks like in tens of thousands of patients that have been studied, metformin slows down the aging process, prevents cancer, heart disease, frailty, and of course, diabetes. And for that reason, I take a triple combo of those things.
Very interesting stuff, and I highly recommend that folks in the audience pick up the book Lifespan, Why We Age and Why We Don't Have to. We've been speaking with the book's author, David Sinclair, who's a professor of genetics at Harvard Medical School. David, really interesting having you on, and I so appreciate your time.
Thanks, David. I appreciate it too.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So we're all very, very familiar with Donald Trump's lack of diplomatic skill, but today we have a story that takes this to a new level that actually seems almost satirical, but in a way it's a refreshing sort of reality that tells us something arguably positive about Donald Trump. And since these things are so few and far between, I do want to pay some special attention to it. You'll remember that not long ago, the G7 was held in Biarritz, France, and we covered all of the comings and goings. And one of the things that we're now learning about are the details of a meeting that Donald Trump was going to have with the Egyptian president, Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. And according to the Wall Street Journal, per multiple people in the room, Donald Trump arrived looking around for el-Sisi and called out, "Where's my favorite dictator?" which resulted in what was described as stunned silence in the room, apparently a joke. One set of reactions was, it's not really a joke. Donald Trump loves dictators, or at least he loves authoritarians. This includes his praise of Kim Jong-un, Erdogan, Xi, Putin, Saudi Prince Mohammed bin Salman, Duterte, etc. He's just saying, this guy is my favorite dictator. I love dictators, and this guy's my favorite dictator. The argument over whether it is a joke, though, I think is the wrong one. This is an extreme example of a clueless person not knowing how politics is done. Yeah, it's more of the same total lack of decorum and diplomacy that Donald Trump brings to everything that he does because he's just ignorant to all of it. But there is a way in which I'm actually relieved to hear Donald Trump call one of these authoritarians a dictator, even if it's not literally the truth. And I'll explain why in a second. Now, on the facts, is el-Sisi a dictator? He is often called a dictator. He's certainly an authoritarian. He gives the military unchecked power. He overthrew a democratically elected president in 2013 in a coup to take power. He's killed hundreds of protesters. He's imprisoned tens of thousands of dissidents of different kinds. There are allegations of torture, of disappearing journalists and activists, and allegations of abduction. I mean, really just horrible, terrible, terrible stuff. And he is a violent authoritarian, if not a dictator. Now, the reason I find this refreshing in some way from Donald Trump is Trump's already thrown decorum out the window. He's thrown diplomacy out the window. Who cares about that? This is just one more example, and what is one more instance of that at this point in time? I am glad that Donald Trump called something, at least by what it might be, if not literally a dictator, a dictatorial authoritarian, el-Sisi. When it comes to these authoritarian strongmen, I would prefer that Donald Trump call them what they are, or at least something closer to what they are, instead of merely praising them and placating them and working to please them and complimenting them. He has already done it with el-Sisi. Back in 2017, he talked about el-Sisi's doing a great job and made all sorts of just completely outrageous statements that ignore the endless human rights abuses that we've seen there. So is it embarrassing for Donald Trump to walk into a room and say, "Where's my favorite dictator?" Of course it's embarrassing. Is it hilariously undecorous, if that's a word? Of course it is. But evidence that Trump recognizes dictators for what they are, authoritarians for what they are, is slightly positive. Is this actual praise of Donald Trump big picture? Of course it's not. But it arguably, in a way, it actually makes his praise of authoritarian dictatorial types even worse. It would be one thing if Trump doesn't recognize that that's what they are and just kind of likes the fact that he sees them as strong figures, Putin, Duterte, all of them. It's in a sense worse if he recognizes that they are dictatorial authoritarians and still praises them, but he's at least calling things closer to what they are. So big picture, it's not like I like Trump now, but I respect the fact that he actually entered the room and yelled this out, even if it is completely outrageous diplomatically, because it confirms that Trump recognizes these people for what they are. The fact that he likes them signals a problem with his moral compass, and the moral compass of Trump is what we'll talk about next. But in a sense, he is not as disconnected from reality as maybe we thought at the end of last week. If I'm missing this, if my take on this misses something else, let me know. But I actually found it refreshing to hear Donald Trump refer to el-Sisi at least by something closer to what he is, rather than just a great leader, the way Donald Trump refers to most of these dictatorial authoritarians. Let me know what you think. Let's now talk about the moral compass. There are two big things that Donald Trump lacks. One of there's more, but the two of them are a sense of humor. We've seen no real evidence that Donald Trump understands humor. He has no sense of humor for any sort of satirical content about him. There's no evidence that Donald Trump has a real sense of humor to speak of. And Donald Trump seems to lack a moral compass, or at least one that seems in line with what the average Western standard typical person's moral compass should, or we would hope, looks like. Donald Trump's daughter Ivanka said the other day, and she didn't say this satirically, she didn't say this ironically, she says that she got her moral compass from her father, Donald Trump. Can you imagine anything more horrifying? This happened at a fundraiser a couple of weeks ago. The fundraiser was at Jackson Hole, Wyoming. It was for wealthy donors, as is often the case for these fundraisers, particularly in states like Wyoming. And Ivanka Trump was asked one of these just BS, bubblegum, stupid questions that makes donors feel like they're engaging in dialogue and all of this other stuff. If you've been to these fundraisers, you know what I mean. And Ivanka was asked, can you share the personality traits that you inherited from your parents? And again, just such a meaningless, vapid question. But it actually led to something interesting. Ivanka told the room full of donors that from her mother, she inherited the example of what it means to be a successful woman, and that from her father, Donald Trump, she inherited his moral compass. Think really deeply about this for a second. What do we mean when we say a moral compass? A moral compass I see as the barometer that we use to decide what is right and what is wrong, and to act in accordance with that. Donald Trump obstructed justice at least 8 times. He's used the presidency to enrich himself. He's lied 10,000 times, 12,000 times, according to a lie tracker. He praises dictators and criticizes the leaders of Democratic allies. He cheats at golf. He cheats at relationships. He cheats at businesses by using undocumented immigrant labor, but then at the same time saying that he's against it. He is accused of sexually assaulting close to 20 or maybe even more women. Whatever moral compass led Donald Trump to decide to do all of those things and to somehow rationalize them publicly or for himself, that's the moral compass that Ivanka says that she inherited from him. Can you imagine what it is that she's saying? Imagine being her husband, Jared Kushner, although maybe his moral compass is equivalent to hers, so maybe this doesn't make sense. But imagine being Jared and finding out that your wife has inherited her moral compass from a guy whose moral compass has been backwards, just spinning around for his entire life. And I actually believe Ivanka. A lot of times at these fundraisers, in addition to vapid, ridiculous questions, you get completely meaningless BS answers. I believe her. I think she's being honest. She has the same lack of a working moral compass that Donald Trump has, moving production of her lame products to sweatshops overseas, using her father's presidency to enrich herself and insert herself into situations for which she is grossly unqualified, participating in the distractathon media circus every time her father gets into some kind of hot water. I actually believe this. She does seem to have gotten her moral compass from Donald Trump. At least she is being honest here, and it is extremely distressing and disgusting. Let me know what you think. Is this just something she's saying, or has she really inherited her moral compass from Trump? And is that something we should be very, very scared of? Hey, here's a funny voicemail. We hear often from a guy I know as the San Antonio troll. One of the traits of the San Antonio troll is that he calls in and criticizes me for positions I haven't taken, and often criticizes my coverage of stories I haven't even talked about. And here, listen to what he says about my view on reparations, which he clearly has never heard or doesn't understand. Take a listen.
Pac-Man, saw your interview with good old Sam Harris.
Right.
Willing to bet you ain't playing this because my statement is just too good.
Oh, it'll never get played. Yeah.
Well, two things. First off, I'm willing that you sit there on in your little ivory tower. Oh, the white man needs to pay reparations. Blah blah blah.
Have never said it.
But I'm willing to bet that if you have to pay some of those reparations, let's say 30-40% of your paycheck, you'd be against them. I'm just taking a guess. But anyway, on my main point, it's pretty sad that you far leftists constantly preach black power, black people, this and that. They're so great, yada yada yada. Yet here you guys are saying that black people can't make it without white people's money. I think it's very sad. And I think it's racist, quite frankly.
This is the best. I've never said anything even related. Black power. This is a program that preaches black power. Who even makes cases around reparations on the basis of whether black people are, quote, so great? So once again, someone criticizing me for a position I've never taken and things that I've never said. As I've said before, as I said when I spoke to Sam Harris, as I've said when people call in and ask me about reparations, I'm open to the idea of reparations. I have a number of questions about the logistics of how it would work. I have a number of questions about who it is that would receive them, and I'm willing to be convinced of exactly how it would all work. But I have said that I believe strategically, in terms of the 2020 presidential campaign, it is a mistake to focus on reparations, and that is my position. So criticize that, San Antonio troll, rather than whatever cockamamie position you are inherently, implicitly suggesting I've taken, because I just haven't, and I'm wondering if you even heard my interview with Sam Harris. We've got a great bonus show for you today. Get instant access to the bonus show by signing up at joinpacman.com or becoming a patron at patreon.com/DavidPacman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.